Hey everybody, this is Doc and welcome back to another edition of Doc's Boneyard. Hey, listen, this song I chose to start this episode out with was a remake of an LL Cool J song called Mama Said Knock You Out. I'll be back in just a minute after these commercial breaks to give you a heads up as to why. Hey everybody, it's Doc from Doc's Boneyard. Hey listen, mental health is no joke and the struggle is real. I'm joining forces with Roman Rozelle, a veteran of U.S. Army Special Forces, to help promote mental health awareness. To quote Roman, I wrestle to save lives, including my own. Proceeds from this shirt go to benefit the Special Forces Association Chapter 38, who help many families in their invisible wound struggle. Now you can get yours today by going to collarandelbowbrand.com. That's collarandelbowbrand.com. Just type in the word Roman, R-O-M-A-N, in the search tab. I'm proud to support Roman, and I have this shirt, and I wear mine proudly. You can also find the link at the Boneyard 2021 on Facebook. Alright everybody, I'm back. Hey listen, in my previous podcast I talked about a invisible wound called post-traumatic stress, or PTSD, whichever you find more politically correct and appealing. Today I'm going to talk about another invisible wound. It's called TBI, traumatic brain injury. And the two I'm going to focus on specifically today are mild TBIs and moderate TBIs. And as usual, before we go any further, I'm going to throw out that Whiskey 901 Studios disclaimer. This podcast is not intended to diagnose or treat post-traumatic stress disorder, PTS, or traumatic brain injury. Now, having gotten the legalities out of the way, I'm going to jump into this with both feet. So, what is a TBI? Have you ever heard of the term concussion? If you played football at some point in your career, I'm sure you've had a concussion. Now, a concussion is a mild form of a traumatic brain injury. And what happens is there's a force, external force, exerted on the skull. All right, let's break it down real quick. Okay, you do a tackle. Your helmet comes in contact with the opposing player's helmet. Okay, that's your external force. The energy generated by that concussion or that impact is transferred through the bones of the skull into the brain. Now, the problem with that is there's only so much room inside the skull. It's an enclosed cavity. The brain has nowhere to go. So the brain absorbs that energy, causing the injury. Now, one of the problems with concussions is not only the initial injury, but the secondary injury. And I'm going to throw out two terms, coup and contra coup. Coup is the first injury to the brain where the external force passes through the skull and into the brain. Now, as the brain impacts, or as the brain absorbs the force of the impact, it's injured in that spot. But since the brain is in an enclosed space, it shifts and it smacks the opposite side of the skull. That's the contra coup. That's the other injury. So basically you have two injuries from one impact. So what are the signs and symptoms of a concussion? Well, obviously there's a loss of consciousness that usually doesn't last more than a few minutes. When the person wakes up, there's obviously a headache. They can complain of seeing stars. There's ringing in the ears. One of the probably most noticeable outward effects is the vomiting, which is caused by nausea. Along with the seeing stars, there could also be blurred vision, and individual might seem tired or confused. And sometimes they can't recall what happened. They draw a blank. So those are basic signs and symptoms of a concussion in a nutshell. Now, the good part of concussions are they resolve themselves. It's just a matter of hours to days. The symptoms go away. No problem. The problem with concussions, though, are the more concussions you sustain over a period of time, the worse the injuries get. And a perfect case in point is Dale Earnhardt Jr. He suffered many, many concussions over the course of his racing career, and finally got to the point where his symptoms dictated the fact that he no longer felt comfortable driving a race car. Now, I started off using concussions as an example, especially for those who have never served on the battlefield and have been exposed to explosive injuries. So, just like with a concussion, mild and moderate TBIs, traumatic brain injuries, are basically on the same principle. An external force, a blast wave, or coming in contact with an object causes trauma to the brain inside the skull. Now, if it's an open wound, an obvious gunshot wound, or obvious blast injury, where there is obvious trauma to the skull, well, that's a no-brainer. You can pretty much figure that one out. You don't need a lot of diagnostic tools to make an on-scene assessment. However, the problem is when there is no external injury to the scalp or the skull, and you have no idea that the person's been injured. So, what are the signs and symptoms of a mild to moderate TBI? Well, the first one is an obvious loss of consciousness. Mild to severe headache may happen. A classic symptom is nausea and vomiting. Dilation of pupils, what that means is they either get big or they get small, or they could be unequal. One could be bigger on one side than the other. It just depends on what side of the skull the injury happens. Loss of coordination, sleep disorders, convulsions. How about dizziness or fatigue? You get kind of wobbly on your feet with a loss of balance. Sensory symptoms. A good one is ringing in the ears, blurred or double vision, and believe it or not, the loss of the ability to smell. Didn't know that one. How about a sensitivity to light or sound? Photosensitivity. That's, sensitivity to light, and I have that one myself. Memory problems. Yeah, I have those, especially with short-term memory. Speaking disorder. You could either have trouble forming the words or trouble spitting them out. Everything comes backwards. Dysphagia, and that's basically difficult in swallowing. And how about mood swings? Oh yeah, that's a biggie. And depression or anxiety. Now, some of the complications, especially if untreated, you can have periods of altered consciousness, seizures, infections, blood vessel damage from obvious trauma, nerve damage from the obvious trauma, cognitive problems, thinking, speaking, planning, problem solving, those types of things. How about sensory deficits? Numbness, tingling, those types of things. And with the mood swings, you can also have emotional and behavioral problems. You act out, have reckless behavior, those types of things. Now, one of the biggest problems that we veterans face is, we either deny these symptoms, don't recognize them, or, pretend they didn't happen and just kind of work or try to work through them until shit catches up with you. And then, either that light bulb goes off or you suffer in silence. Now, I say that for, families and caregivers and friends of anyone who suffered a TBI. Those are the signs and symptoms. And probably the biggest things to look for, the outward signs, are communication problems, emotional and behavioral problems, mood swings. Those are probably the easiest to observe. All the other stuff is internal. And if, quite frankly, the veteran doesn't want to disclose it, well, there's not much you can do except, observe. So, how do you detect a TBI? What sort of tests are done to evaluate somebody who seeks help and treatment? Well, there's an array of diagnostic tools that can be used. CT scans, computerized tomography, which is basically a computerized picture of the brain. It can pick up bruised brain areas or obvious bleeding or a blockage in blood flow to certain areas of the brain because of the trauma. Or you can do what's called an MRI, magnetic resonance imaging, and basically MRI uses magnets and radio waves to produce a more detailed image than CT scans. The only problem with MRIs, unless there is an obvious injury, something that raises red flags, they could see an abnormality. If it's what's called a microscopic damage or damage that's not detectable on an MRI, you can still have those symptoms, but they're undetectable, and really the only way you could figure out if you have that type of microscopic damage is through a post-mortem exam of the brain, where they cut it open and look at it through a microscope. There is also different types of neuropsychological testing, and basically what that is different types of questions to evaluate memory, speech, concentration, problem-solving abilities. And usually they have, some sort of picture that they want you to replicate. And there's a formula that they go by to evaluate, what type of problems or what kind of deficit that you may have because of that. Now, they also use what's called the Glasgow Coma Scale. And that's basically, you get certain points for different problems, like loss of consciousness, confusion, that type of thing. And a GCS that was 13 to 15 usually indicates a mild TBI. Memory loss that lasts less than 24 hours, and sometimes the patient didn't lose consciousness. Or a GCS of 9 to 12. And the lower the numbers, the more serious the problem. Memory loss lasting anywhere from 24 hours to 7 days is a good indication of a moderate TBI. And like I said, there's other types of tests. They do blood tests also. Speech and language tests are really important, especially for the cognitive impairments. They may ask you to memorize numbers in a sequence, and they may pick out a certain number within that sequence and ask you to recall it. May ask you to read something, those types of things. Now, the brain itself is a remarkable organ, and it has the ability to regenerate to a certain extent, regenerate different parts depending on the severity. Also, the neurological pathways, the little telephone lines that send signals from point A to point B, can sometimes be diverted and new pathways formed. Now, unfortunately, as far as treatment of a TBI, there's really not a lot that can be done. The brain has to heal itself, especially for mild to moderate TBIs. Medication is helpful, anti-anxiety medication. And, they prescribe those to lessen the feelings of nervousness and fear. Sometimes they could do anticoagulants to prevent blood clots and improve blood flow to the affected area. Anticonvulsants to prevent seizures. And even antidepressants to treat symptoms, obviously of depression and mood instability or, mood swings. Diuretics are more for severe TBIs. Sometimes muscle relaxants can be used to reduce muscle spasms and relax constricted muscles and stimulants, to increase alertness and attention span. And one thing I did mention, physical symptoms. Well, I forgot to mention physical therapy. You can use that to rebuild strength, balance, and flexibility, and maybe even help restore energy levels. But the non-physical treatments are things like occupational therapy. And what that does is to help you relearn how to perform daily tasks, such as getting dressed, cooking, bathing. But then again, that's more in the line of, the severe TBI. Speech therapy is a good one. And they use that to improve the ability to form words and speak out loud, and use other communication skills, which can include instruction on how to use special communication devices or treatments and trouble swallowing. Like I said, that term dysphagia. Obviously, psychological counseling, to learn new and different coping skills and work on interpersonal relationships. And maybe to improve general emotional well-being, that whole medication thing again, the antidepressant type stuff. Vocational training or counseling to help the patient return to work, after the injury. And of course, cognitive therapy to improve memory, attention, perception, learning, planning, and judgment. And like I mentioned in a previous podcast on head shrinker, I believe it was, I talked about different types of cognitive therapy. Cognitive processing therapy and cognitive behavioral therapy. But the important thing to remember is it's okay to have a TBI. It doesn't make you less than a person or less of a person. It's an injury. It happened. But the important thing is, how you deal with it, recognizing the symptoms and getting help for it. And there's no shame in that. A lot of vets suffer silently, and they don't have to. There is treatment out there. There are institutions, that specialize in rehab for TBI. There's a good one in Atlanta, in Emory, as a matter of fact. There's a good one out in Los Angeles. There's one in Boston. There's one in Chicago. Rush Hospital has a really good cognitive program. So there is definitely help out there. Go to your local VA. That's a good place to start. Yeah, I know the VA is, full of bureaucracy and can be a pain in the ass. But they owe you. Because you're a veteran, don't deny those benefits. Get the help. Especially, if you feel that you can't function enough to go back to work, there's help available for that too. There's disability ratings, which can be a pain in the ass because you have to meet the VA's criteria. But if you submit a claim and they deny it, hell, they tell you what to do. So, it's, just a question of, documentation, and documentation. That paper trail. And one thing I haven't gotten to yet is support from other veterans with TBIs. You would be surprised that, you bring up the subject of TBI in a meeting or talking to another vet and they're like, hey man, I suffer that same shit. And, this is what I'm doing to deal with it. And, you can throw back ideas and, support is probably, aside from the occupational therapy and, the different types of treatments, probably the best self-treatment you can do. Don't be afraid to be your own advocate. You are your best advocate. You know what's going on. You know your problems. You need to look at the available options for, different types of treatment. And, you and your healthcare provider will hopefully come to an agreement on, what you want to do and what's best for you. But if you don't seek the help, there's nothing that can be done. And, unfortunately, you suffer in silence. I'm going to take a break and throw some commercial messages in here, and then we're going to wrap things up. And, this is kind of a short podcast this week, but it's, it's an important one. Hey Doc's Boneyard fans, did you know that you can now get officially licensed DBY merch like hoodies, tanks, long and short sleeve tees, phone and laptop cases, and so much more? Visit my merch store, The Boneyard 2021, at tpublic.com. That's tpublic, T-E-E public.com. Doc's Boneyard is going live and taking over the internet radio. That's right. DBY Radio, hosted by yours truly, will be cranking out some of my favorite bang your head musical Thorazine. Tune in at citrus3.com and look for Doc's Boneyard Radio. Or follow the Boneyard 2021 on Facebook page for live broadcast times, dates, and station links. I'm gonna shatter the DBY safe zone. Hey everybody, it's Doc from Doc's Boneyard. Hey listen, if you're in the Fayetteville, North Carolina, especially around Fort Bragg, and you're looking for that hard to find military badassery gear, why don't you go see my buddy George at Silverback Military Surplus. He's located just outside the Yadkin Gate, 6477C Yadkin Road. He has a wide variety of patches, hats, tactical gear, you name it. Tell him Doc sent you. Looking for that unique, handcrafted, one-of-a-kind gift? Check out Dee's Unique Designs on Facebook. She specializes in custom artistry from paintings to jewelry, coasters to tumblers, and everything in between. That's Dee's Unique Designs on Facebook. Give her your ideas and watch them come to life. And as always, I thank you for tuning in, and I'm going to use that catchphrase again to listen to me ramble incessantly. If you have any questions, comments, or just general feedback, why don't you drop me a line at theboneyard2021 at yahoo.com. That's theboneyard2021 at yahoo.com. I also encourage you to check out the Boneyard Facebook page. That's the Boneyard 2021 on Facebook. Or correction. Yeah, the Boneyard 2021 on Facebook. And remember, it's not the fat, the meat, the gristle, it's just the bare bones. I'll see you next time.